Welcome back. In your business tonight, Indonesia's central bank unexpectedly kept its key rate steady at 5.75%, bringing an end to a run of 3 successive rate hikes, including a surprise off-cycle increase in early June. Bank Indonesia has raised rates by a full percentage point this year as part of efforts to support the rupiah, which is weighed down by surging oil prices and investor concerns over the country's fiscal health. This time, however, the bank says it will use other incentives to attract foreign capital to stabilize the rupiah, which are less inflationary. And a check on how Indonesian markets performed today, the Jakarta Composite down 0.9% and the rupiah gaining marginally against the dollar. And for more insight, we're joined by Radhika Rao, who is a Senior Economist and Executive Director at DBS Bank. Radhika, welcome to the show. Now, markets were expecting another rate hike. So what changed Bank Indonesia's calculus here?
Hi, so the Bank Indonesia has actually raised rates by, you just mentioned, about 100 basis points between May and June. And I think we need to remember the backdrop against which they did that, which was when the currency was under a very one-sided pressure. Dollar rupiah was breaking through psychologically key barriers, going to a record low, and we have seen it go past 18,000. And at the same time, there were other things that were also going against the currency. I mean, the fiscal concerns, some institutional decision making, rating index provider or equity index provider also on holding on in a review. So quite a lot of negatives, I would think, which was adding to the depreciation pressures. And against that, certainly the central bank hike rates. And in fact, one was an interbank move, another one was a bigger than expected rate hike. Now, fast forward to now, I think geopolitical tensions have come back. But what you've also seen is the currency is much more well behaved, I would say, because in the interim, you've actually seen foreign inflows come back. And you've also seen some of the fiscal concerns that were a worry earlier also being addressed by the government. So I think against this backdrop, the central bank perhaps felt that they could preserve ammunition for the time being, use it later in the year if, say, this war escalates further, oil prices really shoot up beyond $100, and at the same time, what other external forces do. I think they want to keep some powder dry, and I think that's why they prefer to pause and they'll just take account of what has been developing until in the past month.
Right. Now, speaking of which, instead of raising rates, the central bank is betting on new incentives to attract foreign capital. Is that enough, you think, to support the rupiah, or is it simply just buying time at this point?
We've seen regional central banks actually do that of late, where, they try to use a mix of rate and non-rate policy measures. Typically, if the currency is the problem, they try to put in some non-rate measures by way of making it easier on the investors by taking away the currency risk. So from that perspective, Indonesia is not alone. It is in good company in terms of what the regional central banks have also done. I think this move was already set into motion a few weeks back when BI had actually taken about 10% discount on the hedging cost. At this time, they have taken it up a bit more. Apart from that, they're also trying to solve a few more issues. They're given, there's an instrument called DNDF. They're giving some support in that for certain other currencies. They are also making sure that there's a bit of a liquidity asymmetry in the banking system. Some banks have more, some less. So they're trying to address that as well. So certainly putting in these measures in place to stabilize the currency, backstop the currency, improve sentiments, while at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, not too proactively hike rates altogether. For our own view, actually, we had only one more rate hike, which was in the baseline. I've kind of maintained that, and I'm still keeping that. Because that's going to be really subject to what happens globally. I think from a domestic point of view, certainly whatever was a worry in the first half is being addressed in the second half of the year.
Yeah, and speaking of what happens globally then, the rupiah is still trading near 18,000 to the US dollar. How much of that pressure comes from global risks like the Middle East conflict and also the US interest rates? And how much of it reflects concerns about Indonesia's own economy?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because before the Middle East escalation, actually rupiah was already on a depreciating path, right? So if you talk about January, February, or late last year, the currency had already begun to lose ground. So the Middle East crisis, in some way, only aggravated the problem. Right now, we are at a place where there were nagging worries on, say, for example, ratings outlook. What the equity index provider is going to say, how the geopolitics are going to shape, what's going to happen to the US Fed. So a lot of questions which have remained unanswered. But at least on the domestic side, I think the authorities have already taken cognizance of the fact that there are some issues that were, had to be resolved. Of particular interest, what is happening to the fiscal outlook of the economy. And I think there you've really seen the government adopt a middle path, which is that they don't want to increase fuel prices, which basically means that they're going to maintain petroleum subsidies. If you're going to maintain petroleum subsidies, you need to make space elsewhere in the budget, in the spending, scale. And what they have done is they have cut the flagship welfare program. They've cut the allocation by almost a third. There are indications it could be trimmed even more. So that kind of gives you again the fiscal space, takes away that worry that 3% of GDP, which is their threshold for deficit, could be busted. Hence, I would say at this point, externals are still not that great, but at least domestically, some of the problem worries or some of the concerns have been, I wouldn't say completely met, but have been addressed for the time being. And one more point here was the rating outlook and the overhang. Because of that, we've had S&P in fact come out and affirm the country's ratings as well as outlook. Again, that was another tailwind for the currency and sentiments in general. So yes, to answer your question, I think it's a mix of domestic and external. External still not far from resolved, but domestically, at least the pain points that were there earlier have eased off compared to, say, at least a couple of months back.
Radhika, thank you so much for your analysis. That was Radhika Rao, who is a senior economist and executive director at DBS Bank.